Hello, everybody. This is Natasha Helfer. Welcome to the Healing Souls podcast. I am your host, and I'm super excited to have Michael and Carla Sommerfeld joining me today. We are going to delve into a conversation about some of their sexual education classes that they've kind of come up with. They live in Canada, and they've presented those in the context of some of their religious communities that they're a part of. And I think that it's going to be really exciting to talk to them and see what they have to say about that. I met Carla and Michael through ASECT training venues. So ASECT is the American Association for Sexual Counselors, Therapists, and Educators. I think I have that right, maybe not completely. and so Michael is a therapist and currently, training towards becoming a certified sex therapist. And Carla is kind of in that professional journey as well. So before I go much further, welcome. Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Is it colder up there than it is here? I don't know. Is Canada frigid? Like
we're about minus 30 degrees Celsius right now.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm having a nice snowfall here in Utah. So, but yeah, tell us a little bit about yourselves, kind of your backgrounds, both either personally or professionally. I'd love to hear a little bit more about each of you.
Go ahead and start.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So my name is Michael Sommerfeld, and I'll go professional first. So I'm a registered clinical social worker. I am both in, I work for the government of Alberta, like the local health authority, as well as in private practice, where I do mostly couples therapy and sex therapy. And I tend to see a lot of individuals who are referred to me through places like LDS Family Services to talk about sexual health issues. So that's what I do, in my private practice.
LDS Family Services being coming from the Mormon community, kind of like Catholic Family Services or something along those lines.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I'm currently working towards certification through ASECT. I'm kind of halfway. This is kind of a labor of love. I think it's really awesome to talk to people about, really intimate things in their life, like sex and relationships. And for me, it's a privilege. I really enjoy it.
Awesome.
And this is Carla.
Yeah. So, Carla.
Yeah, I'm Carla Sommerfeld. I've been married to this guy for coming up on 14 years. My professional accolades are much smaller at this point, but I'm hoping to catch up. So I just started my degree, and the end goal is to become a sexual health educator. And if Mike has his way, it'll also be ASECT certified. So we'll see where we get with that. I had the opportunity to attend a SAR with you down in California last January. So just squeaking in with my education right now, but it's a topic I'm very comfortable talking about. We've had the opportunity to run a couple classes in the past, like you mentioned, and I feel right at home talking about sex. So
awesome.
I think Carla is already a sexual health educator. She kind of has taken upon herself to talk to whoever she can. She's a hairstylist as well. And, her clients have said that they get a little bit more than just a haircut when they come to you.
Good conversations.
Oh, I love it. That's the kind of hairstylist I want to go to. Somebody that can talk to me about sex too.
Anytime, Natasha.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll come up there.
That's good.
All right. So that's super exciting. Just, you mentioned the SAR. So I want to explain what that is. So that's a sexual attitudes reassessment. And that's kind of a training that's part of the ASECT kind of certification process, where people are really kind of, encouraged to look at their biases, their ideas, their cultural maybe upbringings in regards to their thoughts about sexuality, and be exposed to a lot of other people's ideas and thoughts and have to sit with that discomfort, right? So awesome. Okay, so why don't we start with the two of you telling me a little bit about how you even thought about, or maybe you were invited to, or maybe you approached people in your community in regards to being able to teach about sex, because I'm assuming you're talking about mainly from the perspective of in your religious community, which I think you both come from a Mormon background. Is that correct?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it depends. Sometimes there's church communities that are super open to that. Like I know the Unitarian Church does a really like bang up job and being very intentional about offering sexual curriculum and sex positive, kind of backed by, like comprehensive sexual education ideas through the OWL program. It's Our Whole Lives program. So they have a great program. So some churches are very, open to sexual education and having those kinds of thoughts. Other churches, not so much. So can you tell me a little bit about how easy or difficult was it to?
We were invited. So
You were invited.
That one actually did come through a hair client. Her husband would always joke, "Oh, I think it's time for another haircut with Carla. You always come home with interesting ideas." So she was very familiar that this was what my husband did, what Mike did for his profession, and something that I was very comfortable. And they were kind of in charge of putting together a young married adults conference. And so it covered a lot of different topics, but they did want to have one class specifically for intimacy.
Yeah, that's what it was called. It was like, talk about intimacy.
Intimacy.
You're like, oh, okay.
Code word, right? That's the word that's not going to feel too uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's the safest word.
And so we presented this one not a podcast,
just a presentation.
PowerPoint. That's the word I'm looking for. We made up a PowerPoint and we presented it to this class, and I think we did it 1 or 2 or 3 times that night. And then word got around a little bit from one of the other stakes in our area, one of the other units, and they asked us to come and teach at their young married conference as well. And then the following year, we were invited back to teach a second class. So we formatted a little bit different. I think we called that one Great Expectations, and just kind of talking about some of the expectations you go into with marriage and how those might differ. And then we taught that same class at the other stake as well. So
I think part of the goal for us was, like, we were aware that people that we knew and many people were living with some kind of, I don't know, sexual problems in their relationship, or had some concerns about sexuality in some way. And we really wanted to convey this idea that this can be a positive thing in your life, and just start there, right? And we just really wanted to kind of get some of the nuts and bolts communicated about what it means to have to have sexual health, right?
Yeah, and we kind of discussed like the importance of communicating about it. And I think I'm not super familiar with a lot of other church cultures, but I know that it's often taboo, even in marriages, that you just kind of let things happen, and you maybe don't really talk about it as much and don't address things. So just really being able to openly communicate about things that you need to or want to talk about, and start discussing those as a couple.
Yeah, no, and I really like so much of what you're saying, and it is so necessary. I do think that this is a largely taboo topic still. And I think especially in religious communities, where there's maybe, even just we kind of teased a little bit about using the word intimacy. And I do think that it's an unfortunate word to use, because intimacy is so much more expansive than just a sexual experience, right? And of course, things like emotional intimacy and intellectual intimacy, and just different way, and even physical intimacy that's not sexual, affection and, things of that nature.
And sexual behavior that is not intimate.
Exactly, right? Exactly, right. And so, but to use that word, I feel it kind of like co-opts a lot of the sexual conversation to begin with. So in that kind of thread, can you tell me a little bit about what you have found to be some of the basic or kind of typical common, maybe perspectives or even hangups, if we want to call it that people are coming into? Because even as you said, our goal was to see this as a positive, right? And you're kind of, my immediate thought was, well, why wouldn't it be a positive, right? That you're excited, in a kind of typical heterosexual, maybe Christian or religious context, to be excited about sex. And yet I think we, all three of us, know that it's not always positive, and a lot of hesitation or shame or even subconscious stuff can get in the way. So what's your best thinking about some of the challenges that you see a lot of these couples kind of coming into these workshops and classes with?
Yeah. So can I take a moment? So I
Yeah,
think,
take a moment.
if I just think to my clinical practice, like a lot of things that some of the themes that I see quite often are people trying to navigate kind of the assumptions and messages that they have acquired about sexuality, and trying to fit it into their life, right? And it's not always easy. If when I think back to kind of how sex was communicated, like how sexual values were communicated, there was lots of don'ts, right? Like do not touch your genitals, do not touch other people's bodies, do not
arouse those feelings in yourself or anyone else.
Right. Yeah. And if that's the goal, I think everyone has failed at that, right? But then there's a lot of feelings of shame that come with that, right? So if this is the expectation and not many people have met that expectation, there's a lot of shame that creeps in, right? That their behavior didn't align with their values around sexuality, and many of these folks feel like they're the only ones, right? And so there's a real, I don't know how to say it, but a very like someone might feel like, okay, sex is something I can do, it's supposed to be something that is good, but then there's this like resistance and difficulty of really accepting it as a positive thing. Does that make sense? I feel like I wasn't super clear.
No, that totally makes sense. And I do think that in a sense, you're getting to a concept of loneliness, that sometimes when things are taboo or presented in a very kind of prescripted way that doesn't maybe totally fit your experience, like you started off by saying, like some of these expectations, most people have already failed at, right? Like, how are you not going to arouse your feelings, or how are you not going to be a sexual being? And the first part of most, I think, of our sexual educations is about the don't, like when you think about when do we start talking to people about sex? Well, when they're 12 or 13 or 15, right? And yeah, many of us don't want our 12-year-olds or 15-year-olds to be, sexually active, and kind of the idea of what we think about when we think of those terms. And so we're very focused on the don'ts, the dangers, fear-based sexual education. And even if you go back further than that, the original messaging that we get about our bodies, I believe, is a lot about potty training, which again is very kind of like germ-based, yucky-based, like do it correctly, don't be gross. And even some of the first ways that kids masturbate or touch themselves even before they may even remember, oftentimes they're met with parents who take, like slap their hands away from their genitals, or will have messages that are not very body nor sex positive, right? And so given all of that, there's this loneliness of like, am I weird? Am I different? And now we're married, but it's not like you can just wipe that whole slate clean and start over. Oh, now let's start the sex positive education, and there will be no repercussions to all of that backstory, right?
So when we ran our class, one of the things that I did in advance was kind of reach out to a few people, and I kind of talked to them about like, what were some of the expectations you had going into this? And we took that as an opportunity to kind of address some of them. And we had everything from like, well, I just thought we'd know what to do. I thought it would be easier. I thought orgasm would be easier. I thought we would have like the same interest in sex acts. I think one person said that she just wasn't even comfortable with the idea of being immodest in front of her husband, like coming out of the bathroom on her wedding night and, showing herself. So just like being able to talk more openly with our children in advance and prepare them better, I think will go a long way. And then, Mike said we've taken many opportunities to talk to people along the way. And I think after we were married, realizing how little we were prepared or taught, we wanted to change that around. And so we took opportunities to talk to our siblings when they were, about to get married, and friends, and pass on books and information. And we started talking with our kids really young compared to some people's standards, and have fairly in-depth conversations with them, and we talk about things around the dinner table that maybe other people don't talk about.
Yeah, I was just remembering we had like Carla had some people coming over, and we were running a bit late, and so our kids let them in, and they were looking at our bookshelf, right? And this lady who's like, kind of a senior lady, I guess we could say. She turns to my daughter and says, "What does your dad do for a living?" Right? And she says, he does sex therapy.
She's 10,
Yeah.
and it's not a big deal for them to say like, "Oh yeah, that's what my dad does," and none of his books are hidden away. Like they're up on the shelf. They can see.
Yeah, if they really need the guide to getting it on, they can reach it.
I was really lucky in that the author of the guide to getting it on sent each of my children an autographed book after I did a podcast with him. So
Oh wow!
there you go. My kids have access to that too.
There you go.
Well, so can you tell me a little bit about if you can, share some of the main points that you were trying to get through? Like when you say you prepared this PowerPoint, what were the main messages that you were trying to get people to be open to talking
Sure.
about?
And it was quite simple, I think, this presentation, but really we wanted to just kind of normalize that the folks that we were talking to were, in many cases dealing with some difficulty around sexuality, right? And that to kind of like go through that was part of like an adult relationship, right? And to just like learn and to grow and to develop, and giving yourself that room and that space to do that, right? Anything
I
you want
love
to say about
that. And especially from what you said, Carla, too, like this idea, the expectations that it's just going to be easy, natural, spontaneous. Like, again, the classic education I've seen so many people come through my office with is like, don't. And then, at the right time, in the right place, with the right person, it'll be great, and that's kind of like the sex positive approach, right? Like sex will be great. And then
if you're lucky enough to get that,
no follow through, right? There's no how will it be great or what to expect, or and I oftentimes in my presentations have this kind of funny slide where I have this like sacred, like beautiful picture of a couple, embracing, and then my next slide is like a horse like on top of another horse, like kind of like the reality. Like the reality is like you've got two bodies, you've got sweat, you've got semen, you've got like lubrication, you've got
fluids and
sounds. Your partner's face looks kind of distorted. It's like, what is going on?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, right? Like that there is this Hollywood kind of fantasy of what it's going to be like, right?
But if you're not being taught, you're going to Hollywood to learn, right? And
Yes.
Hollywood portrays it totally different than reality.
Right. And so no one realized, well, like in these communities that we've spoken to, where most of the people have chosen to wait until they're married to have sex, right? And then there's a lot of like buildup about what that's going to be like. They don't realize that it might be like that horse on top of the other horse, kind of maybe like there's a bit of a learning curve, and they have to figure some things out, right? Like someone might say, "Oh, hey, you're on my hair," or like, or this is painful, or that is maybe not as
spontaneous and fun as Hollywood makes it look.
Yeah, like there's some learning involved.
Yeah, things that I think that are not that romantic, or like queefing, right? Or having to urinate afterwards, or or in between. Like, oh my gosh, I need to take a potty break, right? Or like just think, and to your point, although we know that there are many people who do have sexual experiences prior to a committed marriage, even in religious communities,
sure.
Those who don't, or who have limited experience, I think do oftentimes miss what I call the build-up process that maybe happens more naturally, right? So they might go from kissing and maybe some light body touch to being naked in front of each other, like from one day to another, right? Without that kind of natural buildup.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen folks who have had sexual experiences prior to what their religious culture kind of says is okay. Like it might have been like a like a super passionate kind of experience for them. But then there's also this, it's tainted, right, with a lot of difficult feelings. And I think like one of the things that I really try to emphasize is that, hey, look, like people who love each other have sex with each other. And sometimes that happens outside of religious values. And can that still be a positive thing for you, right? Like, the fact that you loved each other and wanted to be with each other and were kind of drawn to each other in a sexual way. I'm sure that didn't kind of line up with the religious expectations, but is that also like a beautiful thing, right? And kind of challenging the idea that that there was something wrong about how they got together.
I'm really glad you're mentioning this, because I do think in both kind of evangelical or Christian purity culture, and definitely, I come from Mormonism as well, so I know I got a lot of these messages, but it was almost posited, like if you were going to have those kinds of issues, I'm putting quote unquote issues prior to marriage, that it wasn't a loving act, and that it was a selfish act, or that it was a lustful act. And in my experience, I've had many people where really their only sexual partner was their spouse, but because they had sexual experiences prior to marriage, it really, like you said, kind of left this taint or this distrust of themselves or of each other, or seeing each other as somewhat sullied. And what a tragedy in my mind, that here people who have really only committed to each other anyway, it's just the timing was off, are still left with this very kind of sinful narrative that is really destroying their ability to connect and to celebrate their passion and their romanticism together.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think of, Doug Braun-Harvey, right? And, in those principles of sexual health, let's say in a couple like this, there was the sexual value that wasn't adhered to. All the other principles of sexual health were like spot on. It was consensual, no one was being exploited, it was safe, both experienced mutual pleasure, everyone was honest with each other. And the only thing that wasn't maybe where they wanted it to be was that the values piece, right? But we forget to celebrate that couple, right, has done so many good, healthy things.
Right. And then not to mention that the sexual values piece isn't a clinical piece, meaning that from a clinical perspective, there's no research to show people who have sex prior or after marriage are going to do better or not better, but it's really a values piece. So what's even more tragic to me about that is that only the people who have those values suffer in this way. Right? So in other words, like other people who get together and live together before they're married and have lots of sex and even had other sexual partners, and they still can enjoy a very connective sexual relationship because their values aren't necessarily about whether or not there was premarital sex, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's only a problem for the people who hold the value, like you said. Yeah. So that, that's kind of the things that we were thinking about as we were preparing this presentation. What else, Carla, can you think of? We'll just kind of talk about a couple of things. Like, we talked about, being willing to be open and vulnerable. And I think what this meant to us was really taking a chance with talking about one's own sexual interests and sexual desires, right? This is what I am interested in. This is what I would like to try or do, or this is what sex means to me, and kind of beginning to open up that communication, because like Carla was saying, kind of taboo prior to marriage for many folks.
Yeah, we also talked about like the importance of kind of like holding back all judgment, criticism, or just kind of this, just really open and being able to be soft with your partner's feelings. Like if they're coming to you to express their interests and you're coming back with, well, why would you want to do that? That's not really being soft and compassionate and understanding. So, if your partner's going to open up and try to provide insight and share information about themselves, be open and be loving and be responsive to them as they share those things. And, hopefully in return that they can offer that back to you as well. And just, really.
Yeah.
vulnerable with each other.
And also like having a sense of responsibility for the vulnerability of your partner, right? That if they share something really vulnerable and intimate with you, then you have a responsibility to respond to that in a thoughtful, collaborative way, right? Because that's a risk that person's taking.
I love that. And I mean, I think the colloquial way of talking about this, right, is like, don't yuck my yum and don't yum my yuck. Right? It's like, that's how the millennials are talking about it.
I wouldn't know.
Right? But I think this is where I think not having the skills or the sexual wisdom, that comes with more of a sexual comprehensive approach is dangerous, because I see this as having a double-edged sword. Like on the one hand, there can be unintentional shaming, like you mentioned, Carla, like, what the heck's wrong with you? Why would you be into that? I don't want to do that. Like, and so your partner who just, like gave you this super tender, scary plate, you're just like, boom, But then the other part of that is when you have this sense that like, well, but I don't really have a right. I need to make sure you're happy. I need to make sure I show up. A lot of times people kind of turn that against themselves and go along with things that they're not interested in, or that maybe they're not comfortable with, because I can't hurt my partner's feelings, right? I can't be honest. I don't have a right to my own sexuality. Really, my sexuality kind of belongs to you and yours belongs to mine, right? We have a lot of ownership, I think, themes around sexuality in our culture. And so they'll actually self-harm in that way by not actually speaking up.
Right. No,
I had a conversation with a friend not that long ago where I asked that question to her. I said, do you feel like your sexuality belongs to you? Or do you feel that it belongs to your husband or to the church or things like that? And so we had a really interesting discussion about that. And it's a really tough thing to navigate, owning your own sexuality and speaking your desires and the things that you want. And you have to be careful when you're discussing with your partner, when they're sharing their desires, if it isn't something you're comfortable with. And so that's why we talk so heavily about like really opening the lines of communication and understanding that you got to go back and forth, and you each have to be comfortable sharing your desires, but be respectful of staying true to yourself and trying to find a balance and kind of compromise through there. Right.
And that each partner has like a valuable equal voice in that regard. And I think, as I'm thinking about this, what we did without saying this is what we were doing is we were challenging the gender expectations that come with conservative religious kind of frameworks, right? That men are like the stereotype is that men are sexual animals that just can't help themselves, right? And
boys will be boys type of
that's right. Dogs gotta hunt. And
I just get
yeah, right. And then so then it's the job of the female partner, to make sure that she's taking care of his needs, because that if she doesn't, then he's going to go and get his needs met somewhere else, right? So, I think that that messaging has crept into a lot of relationships where it's kind of like this managerial type of relationship where the wife feels obligated to kind of like meet the needs of her husband, and then it just kind of can carry on that way, right? And then there's this problems with desire and other things that come from that, but I think that gender expectation really sets it up, right? And I think we were trying to maybe flip that a bit, right? And to make sure that each person knows that what they want, what they feel, what they desire is valid, and women have sexual desires, right, Carla?
Yeah, well, and like I've talked with, yes, we do. Like I've talked with another friend who was, just talking about how she's really not enjoying the sex she's having. And I says, well, have you voiced up about the sex you want? And she says, I just feel like I have no desire. I don't even know what I want. And so we kind of started talking about the context with which we're being offered sex. And so if only this type of sex is being presented and this is not something that is desirous or arousing to you, of course, that's not going to, make you desire to be in the relationship and be sexual in that context. So that goes back to like voicing what's important to you and talking about the context and of how you want sex in your relationship.
Yeah.
So yeah, so much truth. I mean, and even outside of the content, like even outside of the behavior, like I think you could have the same sexual behavior be pleasurable or not pleasurable depending on the framing, right? So if I'm approaching my sex life from, like you said, this managerial position, transactional, duty based, this is my job, it's going to have a very different feeling than if you're in a space of pleasure, like being able to feel like I'm deserving of pleasure, I get to advocate for my pleasure, I'm excited about your pleasure, and this is a much more kind of, I don't know, egalitarian type of space that we're in. And I do think that, I mean, sleeping with the enemy is like a lot of the messages I think we get, men versus women, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, men want this, women want that. It really sets you up to kind of come into these long-term relationships with so many ideas about your partner that are just full of myth and folklore and very harmful approaches to really making a long-term heterosexual relationship work.
Yeah, right. And I think without having discussions like this, right, often folks just try things and say, hey, this is how we're going to, maybe not even a conversation around it. It's just like, okay, this is what we do and this is what we're supposed to do.
Doors closed, the lights are off. Let's see if we can figure this out, but never really talk about it again.
Yeah, and I think like what we were trying to offer was a way for sex to be something that is very intentional in between, couples, and something where they can, like really like plan and discuss and share. Right, kind of like take away some of the taboo and just say, hey, look, this is what adults do, and this is what sexually mature individuals do.
Yeah, and learning how to have conversations outside of the bedroom, the bedroom, wherever it is, because I think sometimes we just assume it's supposed to take care of itself, and I always think about that, isn't it funny? I don't know any other area in our lives where people just expect things to naturally happen. I mean, people are reading parenting books and people are, going to the gym and working out. And I mean, if you
hiring
going to school, yeah, people are going to school and going and figuring out their careers. Like things don't just naturally happen in anything that is usually worthwhile. Usually it takes, like you said, intention, education, willingness, communication, learning, mentoring. And with sex, somehow we've just been like, no, it's just supposed to spontaneously happen.
Yeah.
Right. So really leaning into the exploration of developing a healthy sexual relationship or a satisfying sexual relationship. Right, that there's going to be some trial and error, right? You're going to try things that aren't enjoyable, and then you'll hit on some things that are. And if you can't talk about it, you can't learn.
Yeah. Well, before I move on, anything else you want to talk about in regards to your class in particular that you made sure you wanted to point out, or?
What do you think, Carla?
He has the presentation pulled up on the side, so we're just kind of like.
I mean, we spent a little bit of time talking about like biology, and this is how, arousal and
kind of recognizing the difference between like spontaneous desire and responsive desire, and stereotype that men are typical to have more spontaneous desire and stereotype that women are to have more responsive desire. Being aware of those differences helps, but that doesn't mean that that's the way it is with every couple either.
Yeah, right. And yeah, again, talking about it helps you to figure out, one, about like your own sexual response and about your partners, and be able to then work together, right? So yeah, so
do you mind giving a quick overview of that? Because I don't know that everybody who's listening may know what you mean by responsive or spontaneous desire.
Sure. So
you want to take the lead there?
Yeah, and jump in whenever you like. So I think this comes from Bassan, right? Is that the researcher who
response cycle versus the Kinsey response cycle, right? Right. So the model that was around the most, right, was
that someone might feel kind of lusty, feel desire, and then there's this physiological arousal that happens, and then there's like this sustained arousal period, and then an orgasm, and then this resolution, this refractory period, where like if we were talking about people with penises, right, after someone has had an ejaculation, just like if you flush the toilet, you have to wait a bit before you can flush it again. There's a time before you can have another orgasm, right? So that was kind of the model for sexual arousal that was used. And the idea of responsive desire is a little bit more rounded, right? So it looks at like, what is the context of a sexual kind of situation? And
well, the example that I talked about in our class was this idea that, like, you know, some people's desire is like, put the CD in, push play, ready to go. And some people's is like a 60-piece orchestra where each individual instrument needs to be warmed up and tuned together and then brought together. And then the band is ready to play. And sometimes with responsive desire, it's that things need to be prepped and warmed up before desire actually kicks in. And when arousal has happened, then desire follows, instead of desire happening, then arousal.
well done.
Exactly right. Yeah. And what's really interesting too, in Barry McCarthy's work, is he's done a lot of work with aging couples, is that what's most typical in the beginning of our marriages may not be typical in our 60s, 70s, and 80s. And that our responsive desire, especially following that stereotype about men being, you know, spontaneously, I'm horny, where's my wife type of approach, that men in particular do really well when they understand the responsive desire model, especially if that was how they were in their younger years, and as they face, you know, decline in testosterone, erectile dysfunction issues, things that are pretty normal to just the aging process. If they learn how to lean into that responsive desire model, then the sky's the limit. You know, we should be able to enjoy our sexuality for as long as we want, as long as we're not, you know, falling prey to these kind of ideas of how sex should look like. And especially if we're holding ourselves accountable to a much younger version of ourselves. So yeah, thank you for explaining that.
One last thing from the presentation, which is a conversation I've had with a lot of people as well, that we did discuss lightly, was just a lot of the misunderstandings that happen around orgasm, especially female orgasm. I've been reading the book Becoming Clitorate, and it talks extensively in there about, you know, all of the myths around, you know, female orgasm. And I think it's just really important to help women understand that for most women, sexual intercourse, penis and vagina, does not produce orgasm for them, and that it needs to be paired with or strictly clitoral stimulation alone. And so, you know, we did talk about that in our class. And, you know, I think that might've been the area that some people were kind of like, what are you talking about right now?
Yeah.
And some of those, you know, like, is it okay to talk out loud about this kind of stuff? But I think we need to really educate people on that.
Right. So we had a big,
that was on our first presentation. It's not in this
one.
But
filling up we projector, we had this big vulva diagram, right? And we said, we said, like, this
is where your clitoris is.
Yeah. Does that look familiar to anybody? Right.
Does it look familiar? Because it should look familiar, people.
So I think that was
yourself,
one of the things,
like take a mirror down there and check yourself out.
Yeah.
You're familiar.
and you know, I was really impressed with Carla in these presentations. You know, there were like stake presidents, right? So church leaders in the audience, right? And Carla basically says, like, listen, ladies, if you don't know how your sexual response works, you need to figure it out, right? That's kind of the gesture she made, right? Like, basically she said, like, you can masturbate to understand how your body works, and this is a good thing, right? And it was just really affirming, right, to me, that as she was saying this, you know, looking at the church leaders shaking their heads, like, yeah, right, like it was okay, which
and it's this really horrible idea when you are not talking about things and you're going into the relationship and you don't really know what orgasm is or how you're supposed to get there, but you're really just hoping your husband's going to figure it out for you. That's really a lot of pressure to put on him. And so understanding your own body and understanding how it functions and understanding what feels good for you is really valuable, because then you can invite your spouse in and you can teach him about it, and you can use that as a way to become more intimate, create more intimacy together and more feel good stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, like not,
right.
yeah, if you, I don't remember the exact analogy that I used, but something like you're taught how to use all of these other wonderful, glorious functions of your body, you know, your fingers for writing and your tongue for tasting, but we don't know how to use or access or understand this part of our body. And so it'd be ridiculous if we told people like, don't use your fingers, don't touch your fingers, don't, you know, like, this is a part of your body that you're not allowed to know or understand at all. And so just really, yeah, just the importance of understanding what that is in women and how that relates to orgasm and of course sexual fulfillment for them as well.
I love that. And that's actually where I was going to go next, is what type of response did you get? So I'm really, hopeful that it seemed like, people, especially the leaders, which sometimes, leaders can get a little nervous around some of these topics, were open to this kind of discussion, because in a sense, we're going right back to that ownership thing. When you ask that person, Carla, that woman, who does your body belong to? Does it belong to your husband? Does it belong to the church? Does it belong to God? And I don't know that we've gotten a lot of messaging in some of these religiously conservative upbringings where our bodies really do belong to us. And so it can be difficult to, I've talked to many couples where masturbation, for example, is seen as a betrayal, right? Or that, well, I'm not comfortable touching myself unless my husband is present, or that nature, which is fine. We can work with that, but it's just an interesting space that person's coming from. Like, I don't have the right to my own body. My body isn't really mine. And the problems that we see that creeps up from that.
So can I just throw in like the male perspective that I often hear, right, is that if, someone might say, if my wife isn't able to orgasm, then it must be because I'm not doing something right. Like maybe my penis isn't good enough, or what I'm doing isn't good enough, or right, like
not a good lover.
Right, yeah. The men take that ownership of that of their partner's pleasure, right? I think it's important to be conscious of your partner's pleasure, but really seeing it as like, if I don't know how to do this, then I'm a failure, right?
I'm backtracking a little bit. My comment doesn't quite tie in, but it was just a thought that I had, and it's one of the things. We were teaching our classes to a Christian Mormon audience, and one of the things that I really wanted to help them understand is that this idea that God created our bodies with a purpose, and the only purpose of the clitoris is for sexual stimulation. So why would a loving Heavenly Father, loving God, not want you to access all of the beautiful parts of your body? And so that was just one of the ways that we kind of tried to help them see and understand it through that, religious lens. And, we want to respect the values and beliefs that people do have. And if this is the approach that they want to take and understand, how can they understand it in the context of it is something God-given, or that it can be good and it doesn't have to be one or the other. They can go together.
Yeah, that's really lovely. I think every religious tradition has a lot of potential for both sex negative and sex positive framings, and I remember listening to, for example, a Jewish presenter at an ASEC conference and talking about some of the teachings that if you're working, within a Jewish population, you should be kind of aware of, because then you can, just like you can take those same teachings and see them from a sex negative perspective, you can also see them from a sex positive perspective, and helping people within those frameworks that are really sacred to them or have a lot of meaning and spirituality tied to that within that same context, you can see it from a space that's really going to be more relationally healthy, not only from your marriage, but relationally healthy for yourself, to have a better relationship with yourself, in your own body. And so I really love any time that we're able to talk about those framings, especially in a way where we acknowledge that that's not for everybody. And yet if it has potential meaning for you, and reframing can really just be such a good part of creating a new way to delve into your sexuality as a couple. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Okay, so why don't the two of you tell me a little bit about the response? So were people like looking at you with eyes wide open and like running out of the room screaming, or were people
like Mike mentioned, the one that we did, it was actually the state president that came up directly to me after and said, thank you for your presentation. You know, this was really beneficial. So that was validating and good to hear. One of the things that we did right at the start, because we knew how kind of taboo of a topic it could be, is I wrote my cell phone number on the board and said, I don't know any of your guys' cell phones. You can text in anonymously to me if you have questions that you're not comfortable discussing out loud, things like that. So we had that option available, and it was actually really well utilized. We had a lot of people comfortable asking questions and a lot of people wanting to text in and kind of stay anonymous, but they wanted to know this information. After, again, we had a wide variety of people coming up to us and kind of talking about how valuable they felt this information was and how much it helped them. But there was one instance where prior to our class starting, a friend was saying like, oh, hey, are you going to the class? And I'm like, no, we're not going to that at all. Like, we know what we need to know.
I think that like, there was a bit of a mixed response, right? And across like presentations as well. So I think the first, I think we did like 3 altogether. And the first 2, we had lots of like engagement from the audience, right? Lots of questions, lots of people coming up to us to talk and ask questions. And I think the third one, it was, you know, crickets after, like nobody wanted to say a word. And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why that was, but just
was it a totally different group or was it a different topic?
It was a different group, same topic.
Yeah.
I think it was maybe a younger, like it seemed like a younger crowd in the third one. So
yeah,
I don't know. I'm not sure why it was that way.
Yeah, it was a much quieter group.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes that's just the group dynamic, you know, and sometimes there can be just different for a lot of different reasons, you know, whether you went into a different community or a different age or a different, you know, just meld of personalities, but especially if it's the same content, right? You're always like, what the heck? But I've presented enough to know I've got to be prepared for both, where I can't get a word in edgewise or where I'm talking the entire time.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, awesome. Well, I'm so glad that overall this was well received and that you had a positive experience. And it sounds like you're really making a difference in people's lives, you know, in regards to feeling like there's resources, there's information, I think the validation of being able to sit in a space where this is talked about with other people automatically changes the game, you know, like in the sense of like, oh, we can talk about this, we can think about this, we can go home and do something different than what we've been doing, right? Or we could have a conversation about this, you know, afterwards as a couple. I think all of those things are, you know, going to be kind of the fruits of the work that you're doing. So I think that's phenomenal. Anything that I'm not asking you that you were hoping to kind of talk about today or get more in depth with or anything like that? I think this has just been a really fun conversation.
I don't think so. We were just kind of open to wherever the conversation took us, and you know, it's been a bit since we've done any of these presentations, and it would be it'd be cool to do it again. And I think, you know, we certainly would probably we would maybe rework it a bit and add some new material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like the kind of mentioned at the start, long-term goals are to try and, you know, have these workshops or presentations or seminars or whatever we want to call them available that people can attend, and that we can just continue to educate people and inform people. And I mean, the goal is to have a lot more happily satisfied couples in their sexual intimacy.
Yes, agreed.
And yeah, I was just gonna say, like, we've never been paid or anything like that for doing these. It's really just, it's so hard to see people struggle with issues around their sexual relationships, right? And I think if we can make a small difference at helping people approach it in a different way and learn to have a more positive relationship with their sexuality, that's really our motivation, is for people to have good lives, right? Where they can enjoy pleasure and satisfaction and connection with another person. That's what we're going for.
Well, that's lovely that you'd be willing to share, your expertise and your thoughts, in kind of like a volunteer service way. I think all of us kind of in the mental health professions do that at some point or another. Plus, I think in a lot of religious communities, that's kind of expected, or, like there's a lot of community sharing, community resource sharing that's part of it. At the same time, I do also want to just, give you a shout out that you are deserving of your value. And so I hope over time.
Well, eventually we hope to make this kind of part of a professional career for ourselves. So
yeah. So you will be deserving of people putting, some monies down to help, like to access good information. There's value in that, and hopefully people will be willing to support you financially as well. So that's great. All right. So can you tell us a little bit about how to reach you, or anything you want us to know as far as helping you? I know, Michael, you talked about having a private practice. Is there a website or an email or anything that if people want to reach out or know how to contact you about services or presenting workshops, because you can do this online too. So I think that there could be a lot of good church communities out there that could contact you and have you present something even on Zoom or something like that. So
I think someone would be welcome to if it's if it's less professional and more just like reaching out to me, someone could send me a message through Facebook. On the professional side of things, I think my Psychology Today profile is the best way to reach me. So Michael Sommerfeld in Edmonton, Alberta.
Okay.
You find me there. Yeah.
Perfect.
I'd say just go through him if people really have a desire to chat with me.
Okay.
He can put them in contact with me, I guess.
I'll field the questions.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Well, I wish you both so well in your kind of professional journeys. I know you're kind of headed in that direction and in different ways together. So I wish you a great adventure in that, and success in that. So I hope you do both very well.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure knowing you and getting to know a little bit of what you're doing. So thanks. Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you.
Time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. No tishki say the no, so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. "10,000 years of our human history etched on her canyon walls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. No tishki shade no, so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left left alone. Now this can save so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart.